Welcome everyone to today's International Women's Day event for NDY. My name's Cara Waters. I'm the City Editor at The Age, and I'll be your MC for today. This year's theme for International Women's Day is Counter in Invest in Women, Accelerate Progress. I think it's a very relevant theme this year with the announcement for the first time ever of the gender pay gap data for individual companies, showing a gap of 19% in Australia. My own company has a 10% gap, so I'll be hoping that they close that quickly. Also looking at figures from the International Finance Corporation, which estimates that there is a 300 billion financing gap that exists for women-owned small and medium enterprises. So we're not looking to solve all those issues today, and there aren't any easy solutions, but we're hoping to talk about things that can be done, constructive change, and actual action that can be taken. So to kick us off, I'm going to be introducing NDY's Chief Executive, Stuart Fowle.
Thank you, Cara. Welcome to everyone joining us in person here across Australia and in New Zealand. And of course, welcome to all of our online guests as well. It's a very great pleasure to once again be celebrating International Women's Day by bringing audiences together from across multiple NDY locations. And on behalf of everyone joining us today, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the various First Nations peoples, the traditional custodians of all of the lands in the locations where we meet today. In Australia, I pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation where we're gathering in Sydney, and to the Wadjuk Nyunga people of Perth where we're also meeting. I extend that respect to each nation's elders past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples joining us today. In New Zealand, we also pay our respects to the mana whenua of Ngāti Whātua Orokai in Auckland and Ngāti Toa and Te Ātiawa in Wellington. And we also pay our respects to all iwi Māori in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So NDY's celebration of International Women's Day is an acknowledgement of our own ongoing commitment to gender equality in our business, within industry, and within society more broadly. Our own efforts at working towards gender equality support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 5 and form part of our own ESG goals, strategies, and reporting. The UN goal number 5 is focused on a range of areas, including ending gender-based discrimination, providing women reproductive rights and rights to healthcare, freedom from violence, and importantly, providing women greater economic freedoms, empowerment through technology, and supporting women into leadership roles and positions at decision-making tables. The UN's latest gender snapshot, released last year, highlights that globally, over $360 billion in extra investment per year will be needed to achieve its gender equality targets by 2030. In addition to money, there's very tangible need for leaders, for innovators, for change makers, and activists to be involved. The efforts required bring focus, to UN's theme for this year's International Women's Day, which Cara has mentioned, is Invest in Women, Accelerate Progress. Which brings us to today's incredible panel. Our panel today certainly includes entrepreneurs, change makers, innovators, and leaders. And during the discussion, they will explore how we all might invest in women and accelerate progress towards gender equality. I'm looking forward to hearing them share their thoughts with us today. So on behalf of each and everyone at NDY, I thank you all for joining us in person and online. And I'll now hand back to Cara to formally introduce to you our wonderful panelists. Thank you very much.
have Neill Johanson, who's Principal and Director of Davenport Camp. And joining us virtually from our other locations, we have Dr. Angela Lim, who's the Chief Executive and Co-founder of Clearhead. April Walker, who is the founder of Western Australian Spaceport, and Zoe Neill, who's at NDY and is the New South Wales Sustainability Lead. So welcome, everyone. To kick things off today, we're going to start with discussing the theme, which we've heard of this year's International Women's Day, Counter in Invest in Women. So in line with this year's theme, I'm interested in what people think about what actions can we all take to ensure that women and girls have equitable opportunities. Georgina, would you be happy to start there?
Well, best to me. Everybody today. Such a hard question. And I think that just a bit about me, my background. So I am an engineer by training, studied construction, went into consulting, and then about 4 years ago started my own business with my co-partner. We're about 35 people now. So for me, I think that the biggest challenge is there is no single bullet. If there was a single bullet, I think we would have found the answer so far. So I think it is doing what you can and tackling it at each individual level. I was reading a really interesting article the other day in the Harvard Business Review that spoke to very hard to change systemic issues, but really much easier to disrupt. So I think for me, it's about women and men doing what they can, where their passions are in their areas of business or starting new businesses to see what they can do in that area. For me, particularly if you're passionate about it or you're working with others who are passionate about that area, it will drag you along the way to get there.
Yeah, I think those are good points. Neill, do you have anything you want to share on this?
Well, I think passion is the key word here, and having a strong interest in working towards gender equality. I guess by way of background, I've spent a lot of time in Nepal, and we've been working on a program I developed called Educate and Elevate, which has been about reconstructing the schools in Nepal that got damaged by the earthquakes in 2016, and came to realize pretty quickly that rebuilding the schools was one thing. Another thing was helping the teachers, or elevating the teachers and providing the teachers who are women with the necessary skills so they could start lifting the young girls and women out of poverty as well. It's a society that is incredibly patriarchal. There are a lot of taboos. So the work is relentless in order to change the mindset of families who want their young girls to get married. Half the women, by the time they're 18, are married. Of them, 20% are married by the time they're 15. So the disadvantage starts very early. I guess the really interesting thing about that is because of that involvement and because it's such an important part of our business, there are lots of conversations within our studios, particularly around with our men, about this disadvantage. And whilst it might seem like it's happening in a very remote community, we have a lot of that happening in plain sight here. And so the learnings that we get there, we're trying to apply here as well.
Great. And throwing it to Angela, is there something that, any actions that you can suggest we can all take? We can all have individuals or women that we're ready for comes into this when our countering thing.
Yeah, good everyone. So my name's Angela, and I run a mental health company called Clearhead. We provide employee assistance programs to employers across Australia and New Zealand, and we really get to see how women, I guess, get affected disproportionately in the workplace. And it's just really being able to recognize what are the underlying structural challenges that is associated with being a woman. And so, for example, there is still very much the expectation that even though we say women can have it all, it's in the context of, okay, yes, you show up for work, but then you also have to come home and you have to put the kids to bed, you have to pick them up after school, you have a higher proportion of the housework. And so it's really understanding that if we want women to not drop out of the workplace and be able to pursue both opportunities from a leadership perspective, but also in terms of just being able to do their best work, is thinking about policies and programs like, what it means to be a bit more flexible, especially around sort of the school pickup times, for example. It's being able to recognize that because of the increased emotional and cognitive load that they bear, do you have inclusive mental health support if they're struggling to manage the load? So those are the things that we think about that just acknowledges the current status quo, and then actually really thinking about, if you can't remove that status quo, how do you introduce policies or processes that allows them to make it possible to work within this environment? Yeah.
Thanks, Angela. April or Zoe, is there anything you'd like to contribute in terms of this year's theme and the actions that we can take?
I'm the founder of WA Spaceport and Azimuth. International Women's Day for me reminds me how lucky I am to live in Australia, and to be grateful to those champions for women in the past who've done such a good job. They are now out of a job. Like, seriously, they are, in my opinion. In terms of what we can do to continue this success for women in Australia, especially, I'm just a bit about myself. I'm an engineer. I'm from country Queensland. I'm from humble beginnings. I've never, ever been denied access to education. I have had the career of choice in construction and mining in the past. I've always had capital for my ventures. And I don't think we celebrate how good we have it in Australia. So something that we could do to continue the progression of women is celebrating what we have achieved.
Thank you. Zoe, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. I definitely resonate with a lot of the topics that have been raised, especially in relation to different stages at which women struggle to progress their careers. I probably relate mostly to the side around education, and I think NDY as a whole is very aware that the problem does start at the beginning. So it starts very much with that opportunity to be aware of the careers in engineering or in male-dominated fields. I was really surprised to read that in 2023 there was only less than 25% of Australian engineering graduates were women, because I find it surprising that there are 3 times as many men that want to do engineering, especially as a female engineer who loves what I do. So I think we have a great opportunity to invest more in educating them on that. I know there's women in our company right now that would have done engineering had they been more aware, and that really drives that passion to go to different universities and high schools and inform them of those opportunities. And we're seeing that progress even in our latest figures around latest interns being 50-50 male and female.
That's a really good point about education, Zoe. And you did mention the next question I was going to ask is about personal stories and experiences. So is there anything that you could point to, Zoe, that's shaped your understanding of gender equality and women's rights?
Probably a number of people would know that I grew up in an all-female household. So as far as gender equality goes, we were very much taught that we weren't equal to men, we were better. So I grew up with my mother and my grandmother and my sister. And everybody worked. So my mother worked, my grandma worked, my sister and I both worked very young and got a scholarship. So I guess from our perspective and my personal experience, never really faced that perspective that there was sort of a lack of opportunity for women, that we were in any way limited by that. In saying that, I've pursued a career sort of very much in a male-orientated role, and my sister's become a teacher. So I think for me, the emphasis is really encouraging women to be what they want to be. And I think in Australia, we're very lucky not to be as limited by that we're not as hindered by the opportunity to enter fields such as construction and engineering. But I would hope that in other places that we can reduce that hindrance. I do think it's interesting when I spoke to some of my colleagues about it, and they noted that in earlier stages of their career, they might have been asked to take notes because they were the girl, or get the coffees because they were the girl. And I guess to some extent I probably experienced the same, but it's not something that I think about anymore, and it's definitely something that shaped my perspective of gender equality. So I think it's also how you can overcome anything that comes towards you in that situation.
I'm an all-girl household as well, so I can relate to that. Neill, as the brave male on our panel, what's your personal story or experience that shaped your understanding of gender equality?
Well, I mean, I think these are all personal stories. I had a conversation with my wife recently about why she thought, or why I thought my career was so much more spectacularly successful than hers. And I said, well, we spoke about this 20 years ago. And she said, no, we didn't. So had me on the back foot straight away. And that actually opened up an entire conversation around the choices that we make, or the choice that I made in the kind of bubble that I was living in at the time, which was very single-minded and very exclusive rather than being inclusive. And that conversation continues today, particularly with our family, and the conversations I'm having with my boys and my girls around the opportunity that presents them, and the balance and the honest conversations they need to have with their partners about what the future can hold for them. They're not mutually exclusive. I thought they were, and that was a pretty big mistake on my behalf. So that may ring true with people here. I hope it does, because I missed a big opportunity with my wife for us to both succeed.
Anyone else on the panel want to share a personal story, or I can move on to our next question? All right. Angela, I'm keen to hear from you in terms of if you can elaborate on how your work has played a role in advancing gender equality and empowerment for women in your industry and community, obviously running your own business in the mental health space.
It's been a real privilege to really see how we could add support to people in terms of like figuring out what's stopping them. And often we can look at really successful women who've maybe they managed to hit the heights of their careers, and we think that they figured it all out. And even in what we've even heard and seen is that in private spaces, they share about how they still feel like an imposter, that confidence is an issue, even when they've reached those heights. And so it's really important for us is that when we talk about mental health, it's not you're experiencing deep depression, or it can be something as simple as like, I'm not feeling very confident at work. And it's those little steps that if you don't take action early, then those opportunities continue to be missed, because then the other person who is not impeded by those barriers will move forward. And when we think about, as I said before, how gender disproportionately affects individuals, it's, for example, thinking about balance, for example. As I said, because women tend to juggle more of the different factors of work and home, then, are those things playing out in terms of what's causing them to be not able to bring the best self at work? And so if you're thinking about more and more taking more data-driven approaches to understanding how your workforce is being affected, then thinking about how there's a gender lens to the psychosocial risk that exists in the workplace. So I think it's thinking about, do you have the systems and the tools in place to both support individuals when they're struggling or have barriers that it might be that they've placed on themselves. And then also taking one step back and thinking about a systems approach. How are you using data to really think about targeting things, and then designing much more inclusive workplaces? And in this context, what are specific issues that affect women that we can then tackle, and then track that you are successfully doing that. And yeah, it's been really great to kind of work with some of our clients who are much more a female-dominated, dominant workforce, and then trying to understand how we can help them really work together, and vice versa, the other way around, where industries like engineering, where it's much more male-dominated, then it's harder to hear the woman's voice, and sometimes data is it's a less personalized way of trying to raise that there is an issue, that there might be bullying going on, that people might feel unsafe and there's harassment going on, and then ensuring that you tackle things both systemically and then also supporting the individual well. Because otherwise what you'll see is they will just drop out of the workforce, which is a shame.
Thank you. And Zoe, it'd be great to hear from your perspective at NDY, how your work has played a role in advancing gender equality and empowerment.
Definitely really liked just that, the talking about tracking data and different issues that women struggle with in the workplace, because I think it's that data that allows certifying bodies such as the Green Building Council of Australia and WELL to really develop tools that drive that change. I'm very, very lucky to work with Green Star and WELL every day, so they have a number of different credits and features that talk specifically to what you mentioned before around women struggling to go back to the workplace because they have different responsibilities to deal with. So, for example, in WELL, they have a number of features that encourage businesses, so end clients, to consider lactation rooms, for example, so that women returning to the workforce after having children can still have the ability to manage both facets of their life. Also looking at policies that allow the re-onboarding of mothers, and policies around flexible working and childcare support. And it's a great opportunity for tools to drive that additional sustainability into rated spaces. And with Green Star, similarly, in their latest update, they have an entire credit around how do we integrate underrepresented groups into our construction sites, and that includes women. And they give a number of guidelines on building up an effective action plan to do that. And I just think it's really great that, one, we live in a world where these rating tools are driving that additional aspect of sustainability, but two, that there's a lot of companies picking them up and proudly implementing them even without that.
Fantastic. The next topic, which, Georgina, I'd be really keen to hear from you on, is discussing the importance of mentorship and support networks in your journey.
Thank you. So it's really interesting. I'll go back a little bit to something that was said earlier. I actually feel incredibly fortunate. I am, let's say in this room, I'm pretty much more experienced, aka older, than most of the women in this room. So it's a really interesting evolving journey, I think, as I've gone through, and I could share some really fun stories from my site days early on, but I'll have to wait till drinks later. But, you know, I was very fortunate in my previous job to have a female boss, and I led a team of 250 there. So I've been very fortunate to have incredible sponsorship. And I want to differentiate that word to people. It's really important. Women always talk about mentorship. What you need more, in my experience in the workplace, is sponsorship. And that's not just other women, that's men in the room sponsoring women. So I was very lucky. Some of my key early leadership roles, I had fabulous male managers who said, nah, she's capable. And they actually put their neck out in meetings and said, give her a go. I now feel it really incumbent on me to do the same thing. And again, it's for men and for women, but there is definitely a disparity, I guess, historically on that. But, you know, it's really interesting. Some of the most robust arguments I've had in the diversity space was with my old female boss, Chatham House Rules here. But it's a really interesting piece because that lens on diversity is so different for everyone. It's just as hard a conversation for men as it is for women. For me, I am very lucky. I've had a lot of mentors along, and they chop and change. They choose one that's suitable for your stage of life and your career. I've got mentors who are younger than me at the moment. I've got mentors who are older than me. I've got men. I've got women. I've got what I call my girl pack, which is my construction group of women who I ring and sometimes cry to, or just have a general laugh at the industry. But sponsors, and particularly to the men in this room, are some of the most important relationships. And I guess also some of my biggest growth in my career has also been, as I got more senior, in that executive coaching, that ability for you to step beyond the next stage and understand where you're at. So I think having those abilities for women to step up and lead is really important.
Yeah. Is mentorship and support networks something that anyone else on the panel wants to talk about?
Yeah, I absolutely completely agree with everything you've just said, Georgina. I think sponsorship is amazing and it really drives a change in a woman's career. I just completed the PCA 500 Women in Property. There's a number of women in this room actually that I met through the program, so it's a great way just to engage with the industry. But another big part of it was that I had a male sponsor from NDY, so a previous director called Laurent. And I think that, to your point, the role that men play in the sponsorship of women is incredibly important because they have a different perspective of you and where your career could go and things that you don't see about yourself. So through that, we had a really tailored framework, or he tailored it to sort of think what was best for me. But the support I got me to the goals I wanted to get to, but it's not the same for every woman, and not every woman wants the same thing or needs the same support. So I think those tailored sponsorship, mentorship programs are completely invaluable, and they're a really great opportunity beyond the education piece when you get into the business to keep you growing and keep you on the right track.
Great, thanks, Zoe. The next topic I was keen to discuss is ensuring that women from diverse backgrounds and marginalised communities achieve equal access to opportunities for economic empowerment. I think, Neill, you raised an interesting point before about your work in Nepal. I'm interested to hear more from you on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very challenging, it's a challenging place to work. Building schools over there is not easy at all. But the opportunity is enormous. I touched on breaking down taboo. And these are really fundamental things that are disempowering women when the male member of the household places a woman who's menstruating into a tin shed for 7 days to remove her from the community is a pretty difficult thing to kind of face up to when you're over there in front of the community talking about uplifting these young girls. I certainly don't have a lot of first-hand experience with that, so that took a long time to come to terms with. So we're dealing with some really fundamental issues over there around gender and bias and misogyny and a heavily patriarchal society. But change is possible. We are seeing that, and one of the themes that I think is coming through today is education, and educating not just helping the teachers, helping the young girls and women, but also educating the parents. And as difficult as some of these tasks are in this foreign country, we're seeing examples of other similar difficulties right here. I mean, there's a shitstorm in Sydney right now around a particular private boys' school, that simply does not want to acknowledge that women play a vital role in the community. They do not want to become a unisex school. And the rhetoric that has come from some of the parents and the alumni is phenomenal. And I think, well, the sense of entitlement that, the farmer 100 kilometres south of Kathmandu has, the privilege that farmer has, is actually no different. The sense of white male entitlement and privilege that the parents have at this particular private school. So I can see the similarities, but I also despair at how far we have to go as a community to get some balance in this equation around equity and tolerance, and just kind of facing up to the basics.
Talking about diverse backgrounds and marginalised communities getting equal access, is that something that anyone else on the panel has some views on or wants to contribute to?
You to share.
I'm happy for some.
I think the one thing to kind of think about in that context is really just recognizing that, we often think about the bias that women face, but when you add on people who are of different cultural background, there's that intersectionality that actually is almost like a double whammy. And really thinking about, for example, if I think about my experience, one of the things that I was actively trying to do last year was to raise capital for the company to expand our business. And, actually about 40% of women start businesses, but less than 2% of women receive venture capital or investor dollars. So, the common assumption is like, oh, women aren't even starting that many business. That's why they have a smaller proportion of the funds. So that's completely untrue. And so when I started raising capital, I was very conscious of that. And so I wanted to use the metrics to I guess, negate some of those biases. So, we had what we call, like, for example, product metrics. So we knew, for example, that compared to other mental health applications out there, we had 10 times more use than these other applications. We looked at growth metrics or sales metrics. So we were doubling and tripling year on year for like 3 years in a row with like pretty much non-existent marketing spend. And so you think, okay, wow, this must be a really exciting business proposition for these investors. And mental health obviously was a growing need, especially post-COVID. And they will say to me, oh, really great metrics, but I just don't have conviction that you would be successful. And it's just a roundabout way of saying you don't look like a young white man. And so therefore you must not be this unicorn company that they could be. So I think really just being very mindful when we think about ensuring that there's equitable opportunities for diverse communities or marginalized communities, that we are really holding those biases, whether unconscious or conscious, in check, would be my 2 cents on this.
Thanks, Angela. And while we've got you up on the screen, I'm interested to hear from you about, because I know it's something you are interested to speak about, some of the factors that hinder women from actively pursuing leadership roles in their careers and how they can be addressed.
I spoke, briefly about that. Actually, it really is this confidence. Like, as women, we place such pressure on ourselves. We have these tendencies that, because the reality is, because we don't get the benefit of doubt. So and obviously this is broad generalization, but when men are given opportunities, they are given the opportunity to fail. They're given the opportunity based on their potential, while women constantly have to be coming from a place of, I've already done these things, therefore I deserve these opportunities. And so even when we get that, we're almost like in this habit mode of like, oh, I'm still constantly having to prove myself. And so if you don't learn to short circuit those, unhelpful beliefs, then you will continue to approach your career with those doubts at the back of your mind. So that's one of the most fundamental ways in which how our society, again, with these unconscious bias against women, drive behaviors or beliefs that then perpetuates the cycle.
Thanks, Angela. Does anyone else on the panel want to talk about any of the factors that hinder women from actively pursuing leadership roles in their career?
I wanted to say, just firstly, to the point previously raised around sort of you don't look the part. Recently, my sister was telling me about an ad that was released that was quite confronting, which I thought was really interesting, where they said, sort of in the ad, they said, imagine a CEO. And then they said, did you imagine a man? And I think like addressing that unconscious bias, to your point, really is an important thing that we have to stop and think about, that we just live with it. So very proud of all the companies that do bother to do training on it and address it. To the point about leadership and what holds women back, I definitely agree that there's a lot of it does come down to that sort of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. I would say that prior to working at NDY, I'd never really thought about being in any sort of leadership role. But largely, I think we have and again, also a generalization, I guess, but women sometimes have a tendency of doing a lot of the work and saying yes to things, but not necessarily wanting to pursue that title that goes with it. Maybe like having that title can feel like a lot of pressure. Like if you take it on, you might fail just because you've taken it on as a committed responsibility. And to that point, like when I did first join NDY a couple of months in, I was telling my director at the time that there was one of the girls on the team that felt she needed more support, and I really wanted him to help and do something about it. And he said to me, well, if you feel so strongly, why don't you manage her? And it hadn't occurred to me at all to manage her and take that role on. And that was the first person I've ever managed. And it hadn't occurred to me. And I guess I look at that and I think it's also one of the people to sort of highlight to women, well, you can be a leader, you can take that on. And some of what holds you back is not being in the right setting. So not being in a company that actually says you have that ability and believes in you and pushes you to take it on.
April, did you have something you wanted to add there?
And self-not experience I've observed is you're not always going to be successful the first time. And this is from a startup perspective. And what I have witnessed is because I didn't get that tender, because I didn't get that Series A round, because it didn't work, I didn't get that job is because I must be a woman. And that's why. Before you get to that stage, especially in Australia, think about maybe your idea wasn't the best on the day. Maybe you didn't perform the best on the day. Maybe someone else was more qualified than you. So that's something that I've seen too much of. And in Australia, before you go straight to it's because of my gender, have a think about the other things first.
Interesting. Thank you. Zoe, you mentioned imposter syndrome, and it's a great topic. How do you navigate and overcome imposter syndrome, and do you have any advice for other women on that?
Funnily enough, I was at a panel discussion the other day, not on it, just listening, and one of the women made a comment that really resonated with me. She said, being different isn't your weakness, it's your superpower. So you're not one of the guys, you're much better. You're different. Your difference is what's going to make you bring a different perspective to the table, raise different concerns, just a different value to the conversation. And you kind of have to just take a step and remind yourself of that. And I think when we think about self-doubt and imposter syndrome, sometimes we can focus on why we're wrong for something because we don't fit in, as opposed to sort of looking at the positive reasons for why you have been allocated that role and what are the positives that you bring to that. And I think if you can't always take that step back and reflect, it's also helpful to get someone outside of yourself to remind you why you've been put in that position. I'd say generally, even if something's difficult, it's probably difficult for everybody who started in that role. And having an external person remind you that they probably struggled at the beginning as well, and there's definitely a cohort of people that made that decision on your behalf is really valuable.
Georgina, I can't imagine that you ever had imposter syndrome. You might have something to say on it.
No, I have and still do every day. One of the things I wanted to share, because I YouTube after this, a lady called Reshma Sojani. So I listened to a YouTube from her the other week, and basically imposter syndrome doesn't exist. It's not our problem. It's men's problem. It was she gave it at a graduation speech, but the whole premise is from her, and it goes into a whole thing called bike face. You got to read it. It's about when women first got the bicycle, they created a medical condition called bike face where you got hot and you perspired, you might look stressed to try and discourage women from riding a bike. And her logic is that actually imposter syndrome, and interesting, it's not a syndrome, it's somehow been turned into a condition. It originally started in the 70s as actually in the imposter phenomenon, where it was really high, successful women, so it was a phenomenon. They noticed that these women, anyway, read that. But I'll go back to the actual topic of what I think about it. There's a really interesting article. So, no, I suffer it every day. As I've got older, I've got a lot better at quieting the voice, just acknowledging it, as someone says, thanks for your advice. But no, I'm pretty good at what I do. And I do encourage every, particularly as you're coming up in your career, you sit there going, God, can I add value in this room? There's so many more. I can guarantee you know more in that room, in that space than a lot of people do. And even if you know in your heart what you're actually good at, old people like me need reminding what we don't know a lot. So never think that you don't have value to add in a room. You don't have to know everything to add value. And for me, and a bit like Zoe said before, so I think, there's a lot of inspiring bits. Sometimes you hear someone say a little nugget that resonates with you. And someone once said to me, and I loved it, it's the only bit, people say don't listen to the voice, but I like voices aloud. But someone once said to me, talk to yourself like you talk to a friend. I just love that analogy because I think of my best friend or one of my best friends who's, Jacob is a very senior role as well. And she'll ring me and go, God, I stuffed up. I'm like, don't be ridiculous. You had no time. You smashed this, whatever. So I'd be really reasonable and fair to her, but I wouldn't be the same to me. So I just found that a really sensible check for me when I'm out of control on that. And as I said, I think as you get older, you get better at understanding where you can add value as well. But yeah, again, it's not a medical condition. It's a phenomenon of highly, proficient women.
I think that ties in really nicely, Georgina, with your comments about having younger mentors, because I think when you're a younger woman, you often feel a bit of imposter syndrome and what can I contribute? But as you get older, you realise that everyone's really just making it up, and actually, there's a lot that younger people and women can contribute.
I think that's a great point, though, Carl. We've been talking about mentoring and sponsorship, which to me also involves career planning and development, and these are all great opportunities for these sorts of conversations to run them to ground. And I'm in the RFS, and whenever we come back from an incident, we do an after-action review. We have quite a few women in our brigade, and often the conversation is around, did I do the right thing? It's not a question around, did I technically do the right thing? Did I behave in the right way? How did I present myself to everybody? And these are little nuggets around imposter syndrome and completely dispelling that sense. So I think, the mental and career development can play a big role in dispelling the myth that is imposter syndrome.
Anyone else on the panel with any thoughts on imposter syndrome, or have they been fallen prey to it themselves? I'll move on then to our next topic, which is the role. What role can we all play in dismantling barriers and paving the path for a future that's more inclusive and equitable for women? And Angela, I think that's something you had some thoughts on.
Yeah, I think, just really being mindful of just being there for someone. I think that sometimes that's just all that's needed. Life is hard, and as long as we have both informal and formal support structures, that goes a really long way in addressing these barriers, and not being afraid to kind of speak up about issues that you see. I think when you think about something like bullying, for example, the main factor that perpetuates these bullying is because of what they call the bystander effect. And when you see injustice, or when you see discrimination, or even it can be super subtle, being able to kind of voice that out gives air into the room that's permission for others to also speak up. And it's slowly but surely each and every one of us will start to shift the tide on not accepting things as status quo. And so I think we all have our part to play. And when I think back about some of my friends, for example, some of my guy friends are the ones that are choosing to put their career on hold, and they are the one that's staying at home and giving their partners the opportunity to go really forward in their leadership journey. So we all can play a role, and so I hope you could just take the time to think about what that can be for you.
Yeah, that's a really great point about it, taking a village and taking everyone in those sort of everyone's input in those sort of situations. Anyone else have any thoughts about the role we can all play in dismantling barriers? Yeah.
Continue having discussions like this in open forums. Australia is not perfect, but no country is. We should use these forums to celebrate what we're doing well, but identify where we can improve.
This is probably a question that's very relevant for me. What role can the media play in cultivating positive narratives and challenging stereotypes to create a more inclusive representation of women in society? Does anyone have any ideas? I won't take it personally.
Shut down Fox Channel. That'd be a good start.
I have a comment on that. I very much do agree with the concept that you can't be what you can't see. And I think the media has a really great role to promote roles where we don't necessarily see women filling those roles traditionally. To that point, I was reflecting on sort of that type of subject, and I was thinking, realistically, growing up, I really wanted to be a lawyer just because Law and Order was my favourite show. And I think it's really, it's very refreshing now to have a lot more programs where you have women in parliament roles and in leading journalism roles, such as it First Lady and The Morning Show, and that sort of inspires women to imagine to be that role. So I think media really does play a huge role in that. I think media is trying to correct some of the misrepresentations they've made, not just for women, but for other minority groups. So you'll see a lot more television shows with blended families and sort of different genders represented, sexual preferences and things. And I think that's really positive because it allows people to find themselves in those TV shows and in that different media that they're exposed to.
Thank you. You will see come up on the screen a QR code, so you can use that to submit your questions via Slido. So if anyone has any questions for the panel in general or to a particular panelist, we have time for questions now. So do feel free to send those through. While we're waiting for those, I'd be interested to hear from the panelists in terms of who they think is doing it well when it comes to gender equality. Is anyone doing it well?
I'll start. And it's going to be a super generalist answer because I don't think anyone's doing it well or anyone's doing it badly. I think for me, it's about just do something. So, I'm actually quite conflicted because bits of me never want to talk about International Women's Day ever again. And again, I'll come back to the old piece. But I think for me, there's so many people in your roles that you come up that you just have the ability to influence someone or something. And this comes back to my comment I made earlier about it's much easier to disrupt than change a whole system. So I think allowing people a voice to do that, giving people the confidence to do it in a meeting, I used to sit on an alliance leadership team and I was the only female on that team, and there used to be one guy who kept going. He'd talk about a role that they were advertising, and if he said he one more time, I'd lose my mind. And so I used to correct him every time. He goes, I meant handled she. I'm like, okay. And one time I didn't say anything and the rest of the room corrected him before I even got a chance. And I went, now we're getting somewhere. So for me, it's about, I think there's a lot of organisations doing it really well. I think consultants as a broader rule, particularly in our area, are doing much better than construction and trying to understand the flexibility, the different nuances about giving people voices. But for me, it's in whatever role you are, junior through to senior, the organisations who are allowing people a voice to make those changes or have a say are the ones that are doing it most successfully.
Neill?
Well, I think if you look at the Workplace Gender Equity Agency report, you'll see that there are some sectors in the market that are managing to close the pay gap. The construction industry, though, the one that we're kind of part of, has got the biggest gap of around about 28.9%.
No, I think the banks are worse. So.
The banks are... Yeah. Let's all pile in.
Yeah.
That's probably going to your point that some people are doing it well and some aren't. And it's those... people are going to gravitate to those organisations that align with their values. And this is such an important part of that alignment. Our business is basically run by women. We whilst we're interior designers and architects, it's 75% are women. And that does create an incredibly different vibe within the place. It enables us to have very different conversations with our clients and other consultants. And it also means that we continue to attract women and promote them into leadership roles. So that, I think that is a good example of what other organizations should be doing as well. But that switching that bias that starts back in university and at the schools, it's not easy. I mean, 70%, the construction industry is populated by 70% men. And the interior design industry is populated by 70% women. So you've got women and men clashing on projects when the construction manager and project managers have control of the situation. We have control of the client, then suddenly the procurement changes, and then there's conflict. And I've certainly had to involve myself in several cases of mediation where we've had bullying, examples of bullying. And that's kind of the unpleasant end of things that we're all trying to avoid. Back to education. We've been talking, we're kind of preaching to the converted to a certain extent today, but there are plenty of other people that we do need to enlighten and change their mindset so we can get some parity and equity and change this kind of patriarchal society that we live in. It's a big ask, but we're starting today, aren't we?
Yeah, it's always a start.
Yeah.
Anyone else on the panel? Any questions come through on Slido, or anyone else on the panel have any thoughts on who's doing it well when it comes to gender equality?
Generally, I do agree with Georgina. I think consultants is a really good space for gender equality because of that flexibility, but also there's a lot of awareness around it. So, yeah, NDY definitely doing a good job.
On our side, we have myself as the CEO and at Clearhead. I think we have our team leads, 50% are women, and we really give both. Even we have feedback like the interns being able to really share their perspective and sometimes even influencing quarterly goals or our strategy. So it does, it's really starting even right at the intern level, giving them a sense of agency, giving them a sense of opportunity, a sense of that their voice matters. And if you start there and that's what they learn, and then that becomes the norm for them that, of course I'll put my hands up to this opportunity. Of course I will have the capability to lead. So you have to start. So for us, it's very much about understanding, how do we really truly allow meritocracy to kind of permeate the culture of our business. And then, if you're the best person for the job, we don't really care what your gender is. But it's always really nice when we can kind of see almost 50-50 distribution, and this is particularly, I guess, significant in the context of in a tech company. They often tend to skew heavily more male, and that's something that we're really proud of. So yeah, we love to kind of continue to use our little space to promote what it means to do gender equality well.
Thanks, Angela. Any Slido questions? You don't have to read them out. I read them out if they get sent, so no one will know they're from you. Or if anyone would prefer in this room to just ask directly, that's fine. Otherwise, I can keep going with questions. I'm a journalist, so I could go all day. This is my dream moment. I've got them trapped here and I can just keep asking. So we've talked about what the media can do. What could governments and businesses do to invest in women's entrepreneurship to promote economic growth and gender equality? Angela, it seems you mentioned the 2% of VC funding, which is a pretty, it's been the same stat for a few years now, I think. So I think as a starter, they could probably just invest. But anything else that you think could be done?
Yeah, I feel very conflicted about this, but I think where I've landed is I do think quotas or targets do matter. Having funds, for example, that is dedicated to, investing in women founders, for example. It's just, mainly it's about just equalizing the field a little bit. It's very easy, as I said, to have these unconscious bias be, I can discount whether you consciously or unconsciously recognize it. But if your mandate is you have to invest in a woman anyway, and that means that those women will get through the door. I think that until we, maybe go from 30% are female funded and 70% are male funded, when you're talking 2%, 98%, then you just need to kind of, in some ways, just mandate, like, okay, we need to see a certain proportion. I am always really torn about this quota stuff because, like I said, very big on meritocracy. But if the inherent bias are just too strong, then we have to think of ways in which people can get through the door.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on government or business interventions in terms of investing in women entrepreneurs?
I don't want to receive VC funding because of my gender. I want to receive VC funding or government grants because my venture contributes to government strategy, or Spaceport is the most probable product of success for that venture strategy. I would be mortified if that was the reason why I received venture funding or government grant over, say, a male who had a better idea than me. That would just break my heart. And if I'm vilified for these comments, well, so be it.
Point, April, actually, I totally understand what you're saying when it comes to investing in a product or a venture, that it should be because it's what they want to invest in. I would say, though, where government can invest in things that do drive a change is there are a number of pilot leadership programs that are being led by women sort of to create new mentorship spaces. And government grants do go a long way to supporting that initiative. So it's really building a community similar to other mentorship programs, say NAWIC among others, but there's others that need that funding to actually support them. So in that sense, I think government can definitely drive a change in those initiatives.
Georgina, you had something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add more generally in the context of business, because I do tend to agree with that. I'd hate to think I got any role because I was a woman. But again, I feel the same. I'm really conflicted on this topic because I used to be really against quotas, and then I was for quotas, and now I'm somewhere evenly in the middle, just sitting on the fence. But I think quotas can change behaviours, but also when you start your own business, it's quite handy because, you make your own decisions. But in previous business, I remember someone telling me, we all knew you get the role because you were the woman. And that's just the worst thing to hear. And that was someone who knew me and knew how I worked. So I think for me that ability to put diversity lens in every decision is really important at levels. And I think what I've learned as well, there's a really interesting, I think it's by WGEA, but it talks about the merit trap. So people saying, no, we only want it based on merit. But then you actually look at what people determine merit is, and it has inherent bias all the way through it. So I think it's really calling out, I completely agree. I would never want to be chosen just because I'm a woman, but it's making sure that the people are making that decisions have a view on good that isn't so biased in its background that it's actually affecting, you're as good, but maybe they don't have the same classifications. So that's which comes back down to, I guess, how they're being assessed, who's on your panels, who's looking at what good is in funding. So I think it's a really challenging topic.
Yeah, well, for the people who are in control of the purse strings, it's a great arbitrage opportunity because, as Angela's pointed out, only so little of the funding goes towards women, but actually the data shows that women-led businesses are generally more financially successful. So if you do have spare cash to invest, you could be the change.
I think, Cara, the other...
I do want to, I guess, quickly elaborate on what April mentioned. So I absolutely agree. I think you want to stand on your own 2 feet and not, feel like, oh, the reason you got money was because there was a gender box that was being ticked. But I think it's just taking a step back. And like I said, these things are happening whether you feel this way or not. And the reality is when you look at how capital allocators are making decision making, it's very much pattern matching. And so if the pattern that's currently out there is what's successful is 98% of success is men, then you will continue to allocate money to men until you get to a sufficient tipping point where, okay, the gender factor is not so pervasive in whether you're consciously and unconsciously making decision. And it's self-fulfilling as well, because if a woman struggles to get funding, they will, much as they might have the better product, it does at some point in time, the competition does swing to like, how much money do you have? And so even if the male founder had a less superior product, but they were able to raise 10 times more money than you, eventually they will be able to use that money to gain more customers, to then improve their product and basically outlast you. And then it becomes this idea where an investor will be like, oh yes, I told you we shouldn't have invested in that female founder. They failed miserably, but there wasn't this sort of step back where it's like, how much money was that female founder successfully able to raise in the context of all the buyers? And so we need to get to a point where we can short circuit some of these, vicious cycles that exist. And then when we can get to a bit more equal footing, then absolutely I'm more about meritocracy. But yeah, I think it's just something to be really aware of, that these things happen whether you like it or not, and how do you tackle them heads on. I think it's really important. Neill?
The second part of your sentence is, what else can the government do? And I would suggest, and I'm referring to the past federal government, is lead by example. And so when you look at the front bench and the back bench, there is an acute lack of women representation. And so whilst we've been talking about education, leadership is a key part of this. Whether there is a quota system, which is what the Labor Party has embarked upon, and we can see some significant success by that, or merit. I'm not going to buy into that too much. The issue is one of reality and perception. The reality is that some government parties just are not representative of women. And that needs to change. And it is in some parties, but not others.
Yes, maybe not with the latest by-election results in there.
Well, it's not changing. Yeah, I mean, parachuting in a man. What's all that about?
All right. I think we've come towards, the end of our time. We've managed to touch on YouTube advice on imposter syndrome, what's being funding entrepreneurs. So pretty much the full gamut of topics. So thank you so much to all our panelists for coming today, and everyone for listening.